James Haft. Thanks very much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
So, you're all about decentralized societies.
Hmm.
And it seems like we had that. If you look back at the history of mankind, we were all decentralized, meaning most times it was smaller hunter-gatherers, right? Where they didn't have a center of commerce. And it was all about bartering, trading of goods, and so on. And we went into the other side where everything is centralized, but you are preaching to move back to decentralized society, and you're on your mission to do that. So
Hmm.
why don't we start with that? How did you get to the point that you even care about it to start with? How do
Well,
you stumble upon it? And then
it's
let's
it's it's
maybe
been
the
a, it's
journey.
been a it's been a lifelong vision of looking to the horizon of how to improve things for humanity, and I've been a big fan of science fiction forever. And in 1993, I read a book called Snow Crash. I was a big reader of Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury, etc., about humanity, and Dune was very important to me as a sociological study, not really as a science fiction book. And when I read Snow Crash, which was written by Neal Stephenson, he basically predicted the internet and the community of metaverses and people within these distinct environments that were jurisdictions before there was an internet. And just a side note, I'm now partners with Neal Stephenson in his product called Lamina One, which is a metaverse of metaverses. And so I've just always been looking forward to this way to disencumber humanity from what centralization is, homogenization is a disregard for the individuality of humans. And like religion, I'm going to say some controversial things, is about how the individuals become controlled and lose optionality, and not necessarily for the benefit of everyone involved. And so the easiest way to do it is tell a little story. So humanity, as you were pointing out before, humanity is had decentralization, we had individuality, we had our own rights, we did our own thing. And a couple hundred, and starting 1,000 years ago, humanity started to give up parts of of individuality and choice and this decentralization in exchange for a social contract where we were trying to seek order out of chaos. And so we started to develop institutions of centralization to create a better environment to allow for growth and to minimize chaos. And so we created monarchy, we created educational systems, we created the police, we created boundaries, we created countries, we created all these institutions where we did it for our benefit, thinking that these institutions were going to serve us. And pretty much every one of these institutions of centralization had moments, and I believe in fractals. So if something happens in one place, it happens in others. It's very uncommon for a theory to work in one area but not in another. And so you start to see these fractals, the way that the way that these institutions start to develop, and they all started to realize that without the support of the community, they had no power. And so they had to find a way, not, now that they were put into existence, to maintain existence and to increase their power, because God forbid they lose their mandate, right? And a religion created hell and heaven and excommunication and all kinds of the terrible draconian things that happened in the Middle Ages to make sure that you complied and understood the true God, which, by the way, is rearing its head again now, how wonderfully in the world. And education. You got to go to Harvard. You got to go to Yale. If you didn't go to Oxford, you're not worthwhile, right? You got to pay your taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, I'm throwing you in jail. Taxes were supposed to be voluntary, and paid because you were tithing because you believed in God or because you wanted to support the community because that was for your benefit. And then it turned into you better pay or I'm going to kill you or I'm going to throw you into jail. And then state borders, right? When did we give permission to the state, right, to say because your mother was standing in a certain place, that is your nationality and you will comply by these laws. And by the way, you can't travel to this other place and you can't talk to this other person and you can't transact. This other guy can't be involved in your banking system because of where their mother was standing or lying when you were born, right? And so we gave up these rights. These centralized authorities started to have a sense of self-awareness, right? And I compare it to Hal in the 2001 Space Odyssey, right? When Hal's job, prime directive, is to protect the astronauts because the astronauts represent the possible success of the mission. Then all of a sudden, Hal's misfunctioning. Hal's starting to have, either being influenced by another or starting to get sentient himself. And we could ask Arthur C. Clarke what he meant by all this. But at the end of the day, open the pod bay door, Hal. I can't do that, Dave. I can't do that, Dave, because you're endangering me. Even though my job was to protect you, I think I got to get rid of you. And so that's our government. That's our religions. We're being hurt by all these different entities. And maybe there's people that have the right sense within there. I don't doubt that. I believe that there's all different people and people should have choice. But we're getting to the point where these institutions are stifling us. They're turning us against each other. And they're becoming an obvious block to development of humanity in a personal and emotional way. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. Look what's happening in the third world countries. Look what's happening with the drug wars. Look what's happening with migration. All these things are related in some way to the role that centralized authorities are playing over us. And people think that blockchain and technology and decentralization are changing us, that these are the big changes happening in the world. But the reality is it's the other way around. Humanity is seeking a way around these problems that we're having. And whether we realize it or not, whether it's upfront or subliminal, it's all coming back to the impact that centralization is having on us, right? Why is the third world, right? It's not because they're not as smart or not as good looking or not as well intentioned, right? It's because they're not allowed to participate in our banking system. Because the money and transactions have been centralized through a filter that have their own objective, one of which is to keep the first world. And there could be insidious parts of this and there could be positive parts of it, but the reality is the system is set up to maintain the status quo, to maintain the power and authority of those people who have power and authority, and to make sure that there isn't a mass adoption of a new system which would allow a flatter relationship between humans and which would start to disregard the historic problems that are washing over us right now in terms of popularist in the United States and now France and around the world, or in terms of religion causing issues or supposedly causing issues. We can get into that later. In the Middle East and in Africa and in other places where we have really horrible events happening on a regular basis. And if you compress time a little bit and be a little less self-centered and look at this in centuries, it's very hard to argue against the patterns that are being formed. And it's really easy to see where the derivation is. And that's, I believe, in decentralization. The next big fear or problem rolling in right now is AI. And that's why I formed the Decentralized AI Society with Michael Casey and Alexa Karpova, is that we realized that the next big battle is to avoid the centralization of intelligence and the application of computing power, and we don't want that to become another Google. Remember, Google came out in the beginning, and it was two guys from a garage who loved Steve Jobs and who would never do any harm, do no evil, right? And then a few years later, they realized if we sold the data, we could make billions. Who said that thing before? Let's forget that, right? And now you have OpenAI, which
Well,
is
hold
anything.
on. You're
What?
assuming they're making billions is evil.
It was easy to do. It's an easy switch to put on OpenAI, which is not OpenAI. It's a perfect Orwellian misnomer. And it's closed AI that's reselling all your data. And the reason it's worth $500 billion is because you're worth $40,000 on average, and they have 2 billion of us, and that's equal $500 billion, right? But that 40,000 should be flowing to us. That's my 40,000, not yours. And just because I agree to use an app which has a cool feature to it and gives me some cool information, I'm selling my soul for 10 cents worth of information, right? And it doesn't have to be that way. Capitalism pushes it that way. And the way that our system is set up pushes it that direction. But if you start to look at decentralized funding and decentralized ownership and decentralized sharing of the benefits, you could talk about accomplishing the same kinds of fantastic outcomes, maybe even better, faster, and bigger and more valuable if we all shared it together instead of lining the pockets of a few. And that's a long answer. That was a long way of saying yes.
So let me ask you this. And listen, no system is perfect. And I'll be devil's advocate. If you look at capitalism and centralized institutions, yeah, they started by the idea was for them to serve the public. They were designed to begin with to serve the public. And just like people can argue whether capitalism is good or bad versus some of the other options, there's always some limitations of the system. And so, playing the devil's advocate, yes, it's not a perfect world. But it seems, and it depends where you are. Some people, if you live in the first country, you're like, hey, let's keep going. But you don't see that from any other angle. But my point is, any system that has some flaws, and who's there to say that the making it moving it completely decentralized, where there are absolutely no governing bodies in place, would be the ideal. I saw a YouTube video of somebody that went out and visited a country or a state that had no laws. Basically, everybody did whatever they wanted. And maybe it was a clickbait, but it was pretty scary because everybody could just go out and do whatever. It's strictly free fall, Wild West. So the question is, when you are talking about complete decentralizations of society and institution and so on, yeah, you're bringing the power to individual, but there's going to be a lot of people that are going to, and again, they're playing the devil's advocate, that are not going to benefit on it from
Well,
having this kind of
I
system.
don't. I'm very careful about not advocating for any specific outcome or system. I think people should have choice. Okay? And yes, there's limitations to how that gets worked, but I think it needs to be explored more. I think if you believe Chase Bank and Jamie Dimon are your friends and they're going to help you, or you believe that that certain religious scripts are sacrosanct, or more importantly, other people's interpretations of those scripts are sacrosanct, then you should have a choice to do it, honestly. Let's go by the rule, as long as you don't do anybody else harm, do what you want. But if you don't think that the system is helping you, if you don't think that Chase actually represents you, if you don't think that the system is beneficial, if you're a woman and you believe in controlling your own body and your own destiny, and that your body isn't a political issue, you should have the right to act in the way that you seek for yourself. You should have a choice, right? I think that's the ultimate right of humanity, is the choices. Now, there are lines that you get to, murder and other insidious acts, which I believe we do have to think about how to address. But on the baseline, I should have a choice of saying, yes, I was born in America. I swear allegiance to America, and I want to pay taxes in America because I believe in that system. Or I should say, you know what? Some people might say that my parents didn't come here voluntarily. I didn't want to be here. I didn't choose this. This is the Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali distinction. And I don't want to go to a foreign country and kill my brother. Uh, and you should have a choice. In,
What about if people are not capable or to make the right choices?
I
Like you
don't
can
buy
say,
that.
okay,
I
what make
100% don't buy it. I'm going to
what
cut you
make
off.
it
I just don't
drugs
buy it.
completely legal, and you have a
So
choice whether to take heroin or not. It's your own body. Why limit that? You can go like to all kinds of different places with this.
I don't. I agree, and I for one don't believe in the paternal state, because I don't. I believe in seeking situations where I have the same interest as those people that I need to rely on, and that to me the golden rule is to understand and be able to ally yourself based on self-interest. Because if you and I have the same interest and the same relationship to the outcome, then I don't really need to trust you. I know what you're going to do, which is why I like the blockchain concept of truth without trusting, right? I believe trust is actually the problem. That when you see an advertisement for something on TV and they say, you trust us, right? That's the biggest red flag, right? The idea that you need to trust, because you only really get hurt by those people that you trusted. That's the only person that can really hurt. The person that you love, the person that you trust, those are the ones that hurt you. And when someone says, trust me on the outcome, I'm like, that's not what you want to tell me.
Well, James in cyber, there's this whole thing about trust but verify.
But that's exactly my point. But I believe in truth without trusting, trust but verify, do your own research, all these other ways of saying the same thing, which is it's my responsibility to understand the system. But the centralized systems purposefully obfuscate how things work. We're now at a point where every document you sign, everything you do online has 40 pages of fine print that I think should be illegal, right? Because nobody reads it. And the time frame you have to make the agreement, it's not even possible to read those documents. The browser would time out before you got to the third page of your credit card agreement, right? And those things are intentionally meant to obfuscate the relationship and to create what I call these gotcha moments, right? And unfortunately, our legal system and the way we document things has now just become the codification of how you gotcha, how you get someone to sign something because they want one thing, but they agree to all kinds of other things, which they didn't
So
agree to and
I
don't want.
totally, so James, I totally, again, I think I'm totally in agreement with you in that regards to saying that listen, the system is not perfect. There's a lot of flaws, and trust me, like on a day-to-day basis, everybody can completely sympathize with you because people go through these on a day-to-day basis. They also go through these rejections of filing, an insurance claim, and then the company comes over and tells you, oh, number 42, this clause, and it says you're not covered, even though you're paying the premium was absolutely fine. It was very easy.
I live in Puerto
Uh,
Rico. I live in Puerto Rico. I'm a citizen of Puerto Rico, a resident, and I've never had one time where insurance or any of the documentation of the legal system has helped me, right? It's
but
always been, oh, that's nice,
totally,
but oops, sorry, right?
and I'm in total agreement with you. But if you look at so again, my point was to say that the system we have is by no means, and this is something we're completely in agreement with each other, meaning it has a lot of flaws. But then if you look at and I mean in every aspect, and again, I'm in complete agreement with you on there because we can sit down and talk, and there's just so many areas where it needs improvement. But then overall, if you look at in the past 100 years, and you look at the statistics, first of all, there's an increasing less people under the poverty line globally. There are less wars, even with the past couple of recent, kinetic conflicts. Overall, if you look at the last several hundred years, relatively speaking, we live in a very peaceful time. Relatively speaking, the mortality rate of new births and mortality rate of people, also relatively speaking, is on the decline. So my point is, yes, there's so many flaws in the system. This is something we're in agreement, but overall we're maybe not advancing, not in the light speed that you have in mind, but overall, I think if you were born 100 years ago and you were born 5 years ago, I think whoever was born recently has a better standard of living and he's doing better than the ancestors. So that's my point, and I would love for you to discuss that specifically, because again, I think that we're in agreement on one side, but I'm also telling you that even though there's tremendous flaws in the system, we're still doing okay overall.
First of all, I would say that your opinion is, and the things that you're pointing out to, I don't disagree with. However, it's heavily skewed towards who you are and your perspective, right? And so it's easy to say that sitting in the US with our road systems that work and the electricity that works and our manifest destiny and our separation from all the other world countries by big oceans, which are mattering less and less over time, right? And so it's easy to sit here in an armchair. I'm in Vermont. It's beautiful. It's snowing, and Bitcoin's at 104 and whatever the hell's going on else in the world right now, right? It's easy to say life is great. It's not so great if you're in Bangladesh on the border of India and you feel your person is in peril. If, God forbid, you're either in Israel or in Gaza. I think life looks a little different right now in a way that wrenches your heart in so many directions. And so I think, that's a matter of perspective. It's like only 1 in 100 million people that fly airplanes die. If you're one of those 100 million, it's a shitty statistic, right?
But I love this example, James, because and flying is very safe. And if you're one of the unfortunate ones, it's like too bad.
Well, right, but that's life. That's literally life.
Should we say, oh, we have to completely change the airline industry because these 50 people that die every year?
It is a decision that you freely make to get on an airplane or not, right? And you know what the choices are, and so everything is a calculated risk in life, right? And
do you really think, James, that people go on the plane and they think about it, or they just go on and assume that somebody else is taking care of that? Meaning that they go on the plane,
when I was younger, I was a global emerging markets investment banker, blah, blah, blah. I was flying to China and Russia in the 1980s, 1990s to open up the world to the U.S. capital markets. The representative of capitalism globally, and come do business where contracts are sacrosanct and people keep their words, right? God, I look back at it now. I gotta write a book, right?
So you were
carrying the flag. I was the guy in the Civil War with the flag, running in front.
So that's amazing, James. What happened?
God, exactly right. And so I have a huge respect for emerging markets and for people that are in less developed countries. Those are the incredible businessmen, right? I was in Brazil where inflation was like 10,000%, where literally your currency lost half its value in a day. And people in Brazil would spend the morning collecting money and would stop taking money because they had to do a bank run with a wheelbarrow to get rid of the money.
Brazil or Zimbabwe?
Brazil was just as bad. Brazil changed its currency 4 times in a decade. Each time taking away value from the people because
Isn't it amazing, James? Like how many people do you think know this? What you just described?
I think a lot of people my age, right? I'm 62. I think a lot of people my age remember that. A lot of people younger don't remember that so well, right? And so, and again, that's just another fact. It's just the way life works. It hasn't changed over the millennia, right? The young people know different things than the old people, and they have their disagreements. And disagreements are normal and good. I'm not against any of these things. I don't believe in a monolithic outcome or a monolithic understanding. That's my whole point, right? And so when you get to this idea of how we deal with this change, my second point was, the first one was perspective. The second point is that, again, fractals. I advise early stage businesses. I've done it for 30 years. I advise hundreds of businesses. And one of the things that I've recognized is it takes a different person to have the idea than it does to start the business, than it does to staff the business and bring the team together.
Oh,
And
100%. Ideas a time it doesn't.
but but you need but the person who had the idea, that was able to get the early money, that got the first MVP out, he might not be the right person to normalize it and get distribution networks and deal with the lawyers to do a bigger funding and work on the community building, right? Just like there takes different aspects during the life of a business, during the life of a community or a society or a country, who's to say that any one system is the right one in perpetuity? Think about these numbnuts in Washington who are telling us what the creators of the Constitution meant when they wrote specific words, and we shouldn't vary from their sacrosanct. It's almost like Planet of the Apes, right? They found the nuclear.
Which one? Which, the first one or
the first one?
I love
the first one, where they find the thing and they're misreading the text and they're giving it a meaning, and it's, I hope this thing doesn't go off because they don't know it's a bomb, and they think it's the Torah. That's what we have now. And by the way, if you look at how those people are handling it, you have to be unbelievably almost cynical to think that they are being honest in this. They fall back. People figure out what they want to say and what they want to represent first, and then they come up with the reasoning and the logic so that they don't look stupid, and they can try and convince you, right? And that's what we have now for a Supreme Court. That's what we now have for leadership. I'll say on both sides, although I don't actually believe it, in the political parties in the United States. And to me, the idea that there's change, I'm like, damn, we have to metamorphosize. We have to evolve. This is survival of the fittest. If you're stuck with the old idea and that's all that you can say, you're going to get wiped out. The question is when. No system in human history has survived the displeasure of its population. Now, you might say, how about this country? How about that country today? But Mao said,
But which time frames?
But you're right on cue. Mao said, when questioned about that there's never been a successful revolution, someone said, how about the French Revolution? And his response famously was, it's too soon to tell. So time frame is everything. Does a week matter? Does a month matter? Does a lifetime matter? Does 100 years matter? I don't know. But I just know this stuff isn't static. And to think it's static and to think you can hold it static is a fool's errand.
Yeah, but you can hold it for a long time. There are some forces that are, let's talk about decentralization, right? Let's talk about creating this basically US stablecoin, meaning that the government will still have digital currency, but it would be completely different than having a decentralized
That's not
one.
decentralization, and that's not crypto. That's state surveillance. Okay.
But that's the point. So
National digital coin is about surveillance.
No, and I completely agree, but it's all about control.
Yeah.
It's about control, meaning that somebody out there was going to try this to squash the Bitcoin. And it's funny because now they're talking about, and that the whole narrative almost changed overnight. I think that's why the latest Bitcoin spike is because now they're talking about having Bitcoin as an alternative to gold, as a reserve.
Or is, for that conversation going on for 10 years, or is it more about the fact that France is falling apart and has a credit rating worse than Greece and essentially represents the worst credit risk in the EU, right? That's France. France and Germany were supposed to be the engines that drive the EU. And again, you're talking about the economic system, the political system, which are in centralized hands, where third parties are making decisions for you and where you're subject to random outcomes based on other people's power struggles. And so the beauty of Bitcoin is it's apolitical, it's permissionless, it's non-transmutable, and it's totally predictable in terms of supply and demand, in terms of supply, right? And so you have something where you actually can balance against a known. Do you choose human input or mathematic algorithms? Okay, I know which ones are more predictable, right? And you might not like the outcome, but I can tell you the outcome if you're using math, right? And so that's the difference between, first of all, gold is a lie, right? We don't know how much gold is in existence. We don't know how much holds it. And when you want it, you'll never be able to access it. It's just a construct. The idea of scarcity of gold is a lie. The idea that we know how much is in existence is a lie. The idea that it's stable is a lie because there's many more units of gold pledged in the centralized lending system and commodity system than actual gold exists. If everybody called their interest in paper represented gold overnight, gold would go up by 100 times. So gold's just waiting for a cataclysmic black swan, which is being held together by a system which is string and gum and hopes and prayers.
And some people are betting in favor of something like that to happen. But it's bizarre because why would you bet on that? If that actually happens, you have no one to
First
use
of all, you
these
have
things.
to recognize that value is, as much as we don't want to admit it, that value of anything is based on psychological appreciation, meaning in terms of affection for whatever asset it is, right? Bitcoin is valuable if everybody wants it. The same Bitcoin is worth nothing if nobody wants it, right? Gold is valuable if it's shiny and kings want it. It's not valuable if they decide they'd rather have platinum. And this idea of value that people think is somehow tangible, I think is again a problem. The reason that gold is valuable, the reason the US dollar is valuable, the reason that Bitcoin is valuable has to do with a social contract, which is based on an emotional feeling for whether you trust that asset or not. It's really based, economics is not really a science. It's the art of understanding people's desires and the impact of scarcity and supply on value based on those desires. So if you want to move towards decentralization and that, why this is so important. So first of all, decentralization in general, I believe, is important because it represents freedom of choice. And I think that the idea of, if we move down to Bitcoin and to value, because I want to move to AI after that, but Bitcoin and value, that what you're talking about here is people's, whether or not there's an inherent right to humanity to choose where you store your value and how you can spend it. And I believe this is actually, to bring it back to the Constitution of the United States and the wingnuts in our Supreme Court, et cetera, is that this Bitcoin actually, to me, is not a technological discussion. It's a discussion of my freedom of speech. Okay? When you talk, you say anything, you just look at what happens around you. People lie, they bend the truth, they tell stories, whatever you want to call the act of communicating. And you do it without cost almost always. It's almost always without direct cost. When you spend your money,
Yeah, talking is cheap, isn't it?
right? When you spend your money, that represents what you care about, right? That's actually the ultimate representation of your desire to express your free will, right? And so if you tell me I can't buy this or I can't hold that, right, you're disturbing my right to free speech, right? I want to support whoever I want to support in a conflict, right? I want to do business around the world, A, because opportunities are there, and B, because it will raise the life experience of those people that you do business with. Commerce is life. Commerce is the way that we express ourselves and that we improve ourselves. very rare.
And
that
the
you prove
velocity
yourself.
of commerce, by the way, James,
Yes, 100%.
improves everybody's life.
And it's very, as I was going to say, it's very rare for someone sitting alone in the woods to truly improve their life, except some minor building shelter and things that have finite impact. And so I believe that what decentralization is really tied in very closely to the original concept of the United States, which is freedom of will, freedom of expression. And so I think that when you talk about the Bitcoin and money and fiat, et cetera, that you're really talking to me about my freedom of speech. Okay? And so that's to me is one of my core beliefs. I want to spend my money how I want to spend it. I want to spend it helping who I want. I want to help. Those to me, that is a basic human right from my perspective. And when we get to AI, which is a big battlefront right now.
But before we jump into AI, what about all those people that are saying that the Bitcoin was, I think, it's still, some people still feel that it's being used for nefarious reasons.
I mean, are we being censored? What kind of words can I use on this show?
We can blip whatever you want. No, but seriously, like,
okay,
this is
you can
open,
blip
open
me out. You
discussion.
can blip me out because I'll say that's bullshit. Okay, that's complete bullshit, and I'll explain to you why. Nation states fund terrorism and war, not individuals. Okay, so if you want to stop terrorism, stop the flow of funding from nation states. All right, address the real issue. The reason we have the caps on capital movement in the United States is not about terrorism, although they tell us that's what it is, or nefarious actions. If you want to do an illegal transaction in the United States, use U.S. dollars. Okay, they're untraceable, and you can they move really, in airplanes and bags and submarines, and you can do as many as you want. Chase pays as much money in fines for illegal transactions as the entire crypto market, right? So I don't have any interest in that conversation about how we're protecting ourselves from the nefarious threats. That's ridiculous, right? If you want to have your transaction traced and seen by the world, do it in Bitcoin, do it in crypto, because there's an open ledger and I can see your transaction and trace it back to a person by looking where the original dollar came into the system with ease, literal ease, like press a button, see the answer on your browser anytime you want, right? So that's not that. While people may have used it, the answer is if you want to do a legal transaction, do it in U.S. dollars. That's what I believe.
That was good. That was a microphone drop moment right there.
Wait, you stepped in it. You stepped in it.
Well, I teed you up for this. That's that was my goal. Moving on to AI specific, I want to double click on something you mentioned: the fact that the OpenAI is monetizing our inputs essentially. So I would say again, like just to do a bit of a caveat to that. So first of all, developing AI system is very costly. The investment in the past year and a half into building AI models was about 56 billion worldwide, and I think about 2/3 of it was actually here in the US. So it's expensive. It's expensive to research and create new AI models with new capabilities, and therefore it only makes sense that they somehow monetize it. So in order for them to, let's say, raise 50 billion, they have to claim that they're worth 10x that. And then if the person that is worth 40,000 as you describe is giving out the information, maybe it's a small price to pay for everybody's advancement.
Again, to me, these are just tropes, right? Who pays more taxes in the United States? The top 1% or the middle 50%?
Is that a tricky question?
No. The answer is the middle 50%, right? If you want to get money and you want to organize money, if the reason that the answer to your question is true, or that your position is true today, is because the system doesn't allow us to use other methodologies to raise money. Here's the pipes. Here's the only way to do it. Here's the disclosure. Here's who's allowed to do it. Here's who's allowed to invest, right? We don't allow the bottom 50% of the United States economy to invest in risky opportunities because the paternal state is protecting them. They couldn't possibly understand it. But let me ask you a question. Who has become a billionaire based on their salary? I mean, can we count to zero? If you want to get wealthy, you have to take risk. But our system stops people who are less fortunate today from taking risk. And you know why? Because we need them working at McDonald's. God forbid they're able to make money from something other than their labor hours. Then we wouldn't have the people to run the system. I have no idea what's going to happen in the United States if we deport 10 million people. I don't know who's going to actually work. Those 10 million people we're deporting, they're workers.
Maybe the people that are currently on transfer payments will have to step it up. And
you know who gets transfer payments? The red states. This whole thing is based on populist ridiculousness. And the problem with the next administration that comes in, not that some of their ideas aren't good, et cetera, but it's based on so many fallacies and so many, again, what I said before about people decide what they want to say, then they come up with whatever to back it. And that's what we have right now. We're about to deal with the whatever, right? We can't afford to lose 10 million workers. That's just ridiculous. So, and there's so many things bound up in there in terms of prejudice and hatred and fear, that's going to be ripped away, and we're going to find out. We're going to find out why administrations only last 4 years. In the recent 20 years, we're going to go through it again. It's just a pendulum, I believe. But the reality is that we need change, and we need a way to keep the growth not for the top 1%. They're doing fine, right? We need to worry about the middle 50%, the bottom 50%, right? Because systems don't survive the displeasure of the population. Look at all the great empires, right? And I don't know if it happens in a year or 10 years or 100 years, but I know
they're working on it. OpenAI is they're talking about universal income.
That's different. That's WorldCoin, and it happens to have some of the similar people. But I also think there's some nefariousness there in how that's being centralized. We don't need centralization to have UBI, right? Again, that's a group that has determined what they want the outcome to be, and then coming up with whatever the F bleep to justify their position in this great change to become the first trillionaire, right? Which is what that's really about. Decentralization is a much better model to reach UBI, tokenization and distributed ledger technology and blockchain, and the idea of the democratization of power and wealth and decision-making are much better routes to getting there. And centralized systems have an advantage in that in militaristic organization, they're the phalanx, right? And so they get to march through, and it's easier to do because the system supports them. But the reality is it's much more powerful if I can empower all 6 billion people in the world and give them a token and get 10 cents from each of them. That's a lot of money. And I could start to work on that as a way to develop a centralized access to decision-making and artificial intelligence, and start to contribute and start to pay back those shareholders, those stakeholders, and let them receive the benefit of the change that's happening to humanity instead of a small few. And the idea that we need this for incentive, that we need patents and we need exclusivity and we need these funnels and walls to protect the people with capital in order to have growth, maybe it was true at one point. But now, with universal connectivity, with the internet, with the advent of blockchain and distributed ledger technology, and the idea of tokenization and democratization through the ownership of these platforms by democratized groups, I believe that argument is weakening, and I believe it's actually debilitating at this point.
As you described before, and we continue with this AI path too, is that there are quite a few changes around the world. France is one. You've seen a lot of, I think in Georgia, there's riots. There seems like to be like almost like an emerging movements around the world to to dethrone or to make some real changes. What do you think is the driving force behind these? And then AI, the flip side of that, AI brings the promise of a lot of automation. We're talking about robots. Maybe we can solve some of the lower population decline by robots and so on. So there's all these conflicting forces. Who do you think is going to win? Are we on a path to self-destruct from a population standpoint, or is the AI revolutions going to solve a lot of these issues, and we're all going to be like sitting at home watching Netflix with one of these robots that brings over some tea and honey?
I think I got the tea and honey right here. And the I think you asked two questions there, actually. I think the first one was why, and the second is what happens. Okay, so the why is pretty simple: a sense of disenfranchisement, a sense of unfairness, a sense of different people playing by different sets of the rules, based on where where their context is, where their perspective is. That's the driving force. That's what, you don't rebel if you think you're being treated fairly and you enjoy your life and you don't feel that things are getting in your way. You don't rebel. So why? That's the why. The the what happens, I'm so lost with that answer, with the answer that I have so many different visions. There's so many different ways it can go based on butterfly effect kind of outcomes. So I don't really, I have fears around it. If we're going to use history as a guide, systemic changes of this kind rarely happen without violence. And I don't like saying that. It bothers me while I'm saying it now. It bothers me while looking at different parts of the world where I have emotional ties. That these changes don't happen without violence. And the better side doesn't always win, right? And so the answer is that I have a fear of that violence comes in. I don't know, I think that the right in the United States makes a mistake that the left doesn't have guns. I think they do. So I don't think that guns are the answer. I wish that they weren't the answer. That and righteousness and extremity, which seems to be running rampant in all directions, are not positive indicators for the outcome. One of the reasons I like blockchain and I like Bitcoin is because they represent a verifiable version of truth. And if not truth, if we redefine truth to be valid understanding that is objective and not subjective. So, for instance, I believe that transactions in the future are going to be tethered not on local legal systems, but actually on the Bitcoin blockchain. People misunderstand what the value of the Bitcoin blockchain is. Okay, we as humans relate down to value and to money. And so it's all about money, and I can do deals around it and look at the number. And I told you it would be 104. I told you it's going to go to 50. I told you it's going to drop. I told you it's illegal, blah, blah, blah. Who cares, right? The bottom line is we now have a globally accepted, irrefutable database that can't change over time, where you can't spin it or redocument it. And if you ever want to have a transaction with anybody or any understanding, you need to have the original seed of agreement somewhere. And I believe that the Bitcoin blockchain, and specifically through ordinals, which is 100 millionth of a Bitcoin, that you can inscribe a reality, an understanding on this blockchain that can't change. And it will be a 0 or a 1. It's not going to be shades of color. It's not even going to be in English. It's going to be in numbers. And it's going to be 0 or 1. That was the place we agreed is the origin of our agreement. And that 0 or 1 will lock in an algorithmic understanding where outcomes proceed based on mathematic algorithms, where you may not like the outcome, but you know what the outcome is because it's certain, it's in math, and it's locked into this non-transmutable, permanent, apolitical, permissionless system that anybody can log into. And to me, that is the fabric. That's the base layer for a way forward for humanity. And that's why I love Bitcoin. That's why I love decentralization. And that's what I'm hoping is a route that I can help promote for humanity.
Yeah, and I love the vision. I think a lot of people would relate to this. There's still some,
I don't claim to be unique. I just claim to be part of a group that's trying to do this.
yeah, and but if you look, there's still some technical hurdles. Like for example, El Salvador, right? It's a legal tender, and again, I saw somebody going out there and trying to transact with Bitcoin, and it was very extremely difficult, if not impossible. So how do you overcome some?
Bitcoin was not meant. That's what I'm saying before. Everyone wants to know what the killer app is for crypto. The killer app is Bitcoin. Just like the killer app that's really come out for crypto is stablecoins. That's really the killer app, right? But Bitcoin itself is not really meant to be the transactional currency. It's a store of value. It's a way to protect the system by giving people a pecuniary interest in the maintenance of the system. But it's not meant to be the system that everybody uses for transactions. That's the layer ones and layer twos that, as I was saying before, will be rooted in and anchored to this spine that we know is truthful and honest and transparent. But what happens on that will be these other transactions, which are where you're going to have stable coins and you're going to have storage and you're going to have bandwidth and you're going to have these other things, which you'll be able to accomplish without, quote unquote, the imposition of the current government systems. There will be governance. This is not a non-governable situation. This is a situation where you will opt into the governance that you choose, right? And for instance, I have a theory that metaverses are not about graphics and games and entertainment. Metaverses are jurisdictions. They're jurisdictions which are governed by the code, right? And you will have a choice of taking your avatar that will represent you, that will be algorithmically driven, have a digital wallet attached to it so it can transact, and will be governed by AI and by your instructions, and that you will then be able to take that entity, which is like a corporation in the old world, and you'll be able to place it in any jurisdiction you want, and you will choose the jurisdiction based on the features that you like in that. So you can pick one that has taxes, but for the taxes, you're able to do certain things, right? Or you choose this one because because when you were younger, you thought it was important for things to be simpler, etc. And then you could graduate to where you have your assets in another one because they pay you for being there, right? And you value the current income over the order over chaos. And so be able to make, like I was saying before, what I believe in is choice. And what this decentralization and what metaverses and moving towards a world where the laws are algorithmic and mathematic, right? That you give yourselves the opportunity to have transparent opportunities where you can have truth without trusting, where you can learn and use your knowledge to make choices that represent what you seek to optimize, yourself as a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like at least the metaverse from the big one that the Meta created didn't take off. I guess people did not adopt the idea of.
Meta
I think that the majority.
Meta is a centralized entity that has its own agenda that tried to launch the currency of the world. It's the one time, thank God, the government actually stepped in. It was like, I think it's the one time I agree with Elizabeth Warren. That would have been horrible. They had a network effect for a huge benefit, right? And I'm surprised Amazon hasn't done it yet. Amazon has the perfect situation to launch the Amazon coin, which is automatically transferable into any value measure that you come up with. Gold, silver, dollars, crypto, who cares? Just here's how many Amazon credits you have. Show me your wallet. Whatever you have, I'll monetize it for you, and I'll send you
They just invested big time into AI. So maybe that's next. So you heard that here first, folks. James, I'll give you credit when credit is due. When Amazon does launch it, and we're running a bit out of time. Do you have a few more minutes? I wanted to chat about specifically about AI. People are saying that the power be or people that are knowledgeable saying that we're about 2 years away from AGI, self-aware AI. Are you a proponent of AI being a greater good for the universe, or are we facing
I think there's still,
potential stock the disaster?
oh my God, that's almost a religious conversation, right? Because what is life? What is thought? What is free will? What is creativity? And so we have some convenient tests from 100 years ago about the Turing, 65 years ago, the Turing tests or whatever, which I don't think are relevant today anymore because I think they've been surpassed and we're still not there.
Yeah, long time ago.
Yeah. First of all, I don't think we're that close right now. What I see in AI right now is not original thought so much as brute force application of databases and linear programming, which produce entertaining and sometimes relevant results. That's how I look at AI as we have it today. I think we're still very early. We, we're at the point where I can do parlor tricks, but I can't really explain them, and they're not really what you're telling me they are, right? That's where I think we are now. Do computers become sentient? I don't know because I can't even define sentient, right? I don't know what that means. We're at the point where computers are writing code for computers, which is interesting. So we do have the spawn of computer code, right? And so maybe that's life, right? And so if you define life as as the ability to bring new things into action that can make decisions and do things, maybe we have life already, right? Because I can go to a computer to have it write a bot, and that bot can transact with you, and that bot can honestly have this transaction. I have enough crap on YouTube, and enough people have met me and written down crap, not that I'm even important in the big fabric of the world, that you could point an LLM to my thing and have a conversation, have it do this conversation. There's not much new about what I'm saying, right? And so that brings me down to what I really think about these systems, which is these systems are limited because they only know what they know. They don't even have the indications to sense and get the awareness of what they don't know. So over time, they're really learning what they know, and they're starting to learn how to nibble at the edges of what they don't know, of what the definition of the universe, their universe, really is. And so I think that right now, the systems are limited by this. If, for instance, the Google system, up until a couple months ago, I don't know if this was fixed, but if you typed in about the Middle East and about Palestine and Gaza, they would say it started 75 years ago when everything was taken from the Palestinians, and that's the beginning of that's what it was taught, right? There's no Israel, there's no history, there's no King David, right? And so that's the world according to Google's LLM. Now, people came in and tried to change it, and other people tried to change it back, and it turns into this again.
It's the bias of these LLMs, and then on top of that, I think that you touch upon a really good point, which I want to emphasize. There's no explainability, meaning it's completely black box. You have no idea.
It's a black box. I don't know. So there is literally, it is a safe statement to say that every LLM out there has bias, right? And brings back the question, does every human being have bias, right? And what is this thing we call truth, right? And is it based more on context than on objectivity, right? And this is, again, why I like bringing this back towards a non-transmutable global database that's ones and zeros, because it gets us back to at least a cleaner concept of truth and of history, because history gets written by the victor, right? And I used to run one of the largest decentralized file storage businesses globally. It was called DLTX. We were publicly listed in Norway. We ran on the Filecoin system. Filecoin was created to be the memory of humanity. And one of the first two things that we took on as large databases when I formed the company was the Shoah Foundation, to remember the memories of people that were in the Holocaust, because there's people that believe that there wasn't a Holocaust. And B, the Ukrainian National Archive, that without taking a position between Russia and the Ukraine, there's no question what happens to the Ukrainian history and collective memory if Russia wins, right? And so it's really important to have these places where you can at least memorialize things and make them certain and transparent and non-transmutable, because otherwise what we get is a lot more opinion. My opinion's more important than your facts, because who remembers the facts? And how are they recorded? So this is why this stuff is important to me. Again, it's fractals, where it goes from the human psyche to our economy to creating opportunity globally to forming a global community, right? These are things that the centralized system stands in the way of accomplishing.
So what do you, last question is, so you mentioned the collective memory, and I agree with you that history has been rewritten many times, depending on who you ask. But what happens when somebody pulls the plug, meaning that these systems, that the decentralized systems today at least, all require constant power? How do we overcome?
Listen, I have 100% that is a possibility and something to think about. My answer would be,
Then we go tabula rasa. We go like clean slate, real clean slate.
I'm not in favor of global power grids. Like, I like localized small microgrids for exactly the reason you're talking about. I don't.
We're not allowed. We're not allowed.
Google and Microsoft and Amazon are all building small-scale nuclear reactors next to their power data centers for exactly what reason that you're talking about. A, money, but B, independence and decentralization, right? Decentralization is not just about the internet. The problem you're pointing to is, hey, our power system is centralized, right? What happens if a centralized authority or someone attacks the centralized authority and pulls the plug? And I'm like, how stupid is it to be centralized? How stupid is it to give some foreign entity, or foreign by thought, where they could, seeking to do damage to you, could pull one plug and destroy everything, right? By the way, that's why the internet exists. The internet exists because the U.S. government was afraid that a electronic magnetic pulse over Chicago would destroy AT&T's system, and the person in Washington wouldn't be able to communicate with the person in Wyoming to send a nuclear weapon. And so they built a system that was fault resistant, that you would have millions of connectivity routes, and only one of them had to exist to get the message through. That's the purpose. That was the original purpose.
I thought, James, it was for me to to click twice and then get a package to my house.
It was porno. I thought it was porno.
You went there, James.
The only thing, it's the first thing that makes money in any new technology, whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
Isn't it amazing? Listen, I feel we have to do episode 2. I think we're just going to scratch the surface of the stuff that we can go through, and we're running out of time. What's the easiest way for people to get in touch? Maybe just define what do you do? How do you help people? What's your foundation all about?
Your handle is JFHAFT. So it's JFHAFT. That's my Twitter handle. It's open to everybody. My company that I've founded to focus on the decentralization of AI and as a specific, lever to try and change the world, it's called DAIS, DAIS .global, which stands for Decentralized AI Society .global. We throw events around the world, usually where the big crypto and AI conferences are. Our next one is going to be at Davos. Boo, hiss, everyone can have their opinion about Davos, but we're going to be at Davos doing that. And then we tend to go around the world and do the major crypto and AI And the reason that the crypto and AI are tied together is that we think that AI is the operating system for humanity going forward. It's how you're going to interact with technology, and that AI is actually the killer use case of crypto that everybody's looking for, because you can't accomplish decentralized AI without pulverizing and decentralizing information, which requires crypto, whether you're pro crypto as currency or not.
Amazing. And we live in a super interesting times, and it seems like things are accelerating in all fronts. The next several years are going to be super interesting on many fronts. So I'd love to follow up with you on maybe having these type of conversation on a regular basis. Davos, it seems like almost an oxymoron to host a decentralized conversation over there, no?
Well, it's yes, but one of the things I've learned is that if you want to be successful fishing, you have to go where the fish are. Right. So while I agree with you, and it's in a lot of ways I'm a heretic walking the walls there, walking the halls. On the other hand, I found that some people listen. If you just find that one right person, it makes everything worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. James, thanks very much for joining me today. Much appreciated. It was an amazing conversation. Looking forward to having another one sometime soon. And until then, thank you very much all who joined. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thanks very much, James.
My pleasure. Oh, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to it. I'd be happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much.